Is gearing up for a very busy 2012, and joining us right now, many members of the Financial Services Committee. Chairman Spencer Backus, who we've already spoken with this morning, he's joined by Republican Congresswoman Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia, also Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who is a Democrat from California, and Congressman Jim Himes, who is a Democrat from Connecticut. And welcome to all of you. Thank you for hosting us here today. Chairman Backus, I'd like to go back. We've talked about this room and some of the important hearings that have come through this room, some of the things that have been done here, including the Whitewater hearings during the Clinton administration, the WorldCom hearings. This is where Dodd-Frank's conference was set up, too. And you have a few important conferences that are coming up that I don't think have been announced yet. Can you tell us about those?
A few meetings coming up in this room.
Meetings coming up, I'm sorry. Becky, we're going to have Ben Bernanke, Chairman of the Fed, sitting where you're sitting. On February 29th.
It is.
And he will
right here, I think.
That's right.
In the middle.
Sitting right between where y'all, both of you are sitting. That's right. And of course, he will give us a state of the economy and monetary policy, and that'll be an interesting hearing. Secretary will be here the third week in March to talk about the sovereign debt crisis in Europe, and we're obviously concerned that the United States not make commitments over there to bail out Europe through the IMF with all our demands on our budget and our deficit here. That'll be an important hearing. Mr. Cordray will be before our committee later to talk about his recess appointment, which occurred obviously when the Senate was in session. In fact, they passed the payroll tax extension during that recess. So if there was truly a recess, then the payroll tax extension was passed during a recess, which couldn't have happened, and the President signed that bill. Mr. Himes has a bill that we passed out of the House. In fact, we had 4 bills to help small businesses gain access to more capital. We're going to follow up on that in hearings on mixed messages that the regulators are sending to our banks. Here in Washington, they're being told to lend more money. However, bank examiners in the field are telling them to limit their loans and pull back on those loans. So that's what we call a mixed message. So that's another important hearing.
We're going to be focusing on a lot of those issues, but tonight really the center stage goes to the President with his State of the Union address. And Congresswoman Waters, we know there are several things that we're going to be hearing about. One of them is very likely to be housing, because that is still a huge issue for the economy right now. What do you hope to hear from the President tonight, and what would you like to see happen?
Well, I know that a meeting has been held recently where the administration is in negotiations with the banks for a settlement. And I'm hopeful that the President is going to talk about principal reduction. The mortgages that have brought this country almost to its knees and created the financial crisis in housing must be dealt with. The modification plans and initiatives have not worked very well, and we have millions of homes that are underwater. And so we have to do something about this housing crisis if we're going to stabilize this economy.
We spoke earlier with Chairman Backus about this issue, and his point is one that many Tea Party people have pointed out too, is that this rewards bad behavior by people who maybe took out more than they should have, and maybe it's not the best way, the use of taxpayer dollars, to try and get the housing problem fixed again.
I disagree with that. I really do. Of course, there were some people who may have taken advantage of the housing bubble, but what we saw in the market was a lot of exotic products that had not been on the market before. You had no documentation loans to people who certainly should not have been given those loans. No documentation loans were meant for really high income people. You had no interest loans. You had these ARMs. You had all of these exotic products, and people were encouraged to sign on the dotted line, not knowing that these loans were going to reset and they would not be able to afford them. I think that what we're going to find is, with the proper investigations, there's a lot of fraud that has been involved, and that a lot of homeowners are at risk. because they didn't understand the exotic products that were being forced on them. So I don't think that people, all of a sudden, all of these Americans took advantage of the markets. I don't think so. It was not a conspiracy by millions of people. Something went down in the housing market, and that something had to do with these exotic products that were put on the market. People didn't understand, were encouraged to take, and a lot of fraud was involved.
Congresswoman Capito, we know that there were some complicated products that were out there, some new ones that were out there, but how should this problem be dealt with?
Well, I think, it's been trying to be dealt with at the federal level, but I think we all recognize that the efforts that have been put forward, both by the administration and through the Congress, have been very unsuccessful. We've had HARP and HAMP and help for homeowners and et cetera, and what we found is that it's still, there's still many folks who are being foreclosed on, and many folks that are still in deep trouble. And we also have, I think, a very troubling aspect of this, that our FHA is, the capital fund with the FHA is perilously low. And we had a hearing on this through the Housing Subcommittee, and I think that it was a major red flag because we don't want to be in a position of bailing out, as we did with Fannie and Freddie, another federal agency. But I think we all know the route of rebuilding our housing market and our residential mortgage market is going to absolutely has to be a solid building block to restoring our economy.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who say that the economy rests very solely on what happens with that housing market. The jobs won't come until that. And Congressman Himes, I know jobs has been a real focus for you. It's something we're going to hear from the president tonight as well. What should we be looking at in terms of that, though? Is housing really part of the fix for jobs, or is there another way to go about this?
Well, fixing the housing situation is critical. Look, it's not the only thing that is holding back the economy right now, but it's probably top of most people's list. Bottom line is, if you're living in a home and your mortgage is underwater, you're probably not going to go out and buy a car. You're probably not going to go out and, frequent your local merchants and do the things that really lead to a truly robust recovery, rather than the sort of hesitant recovery we're seeing right now. But there's plenty of other things out there to worry about, of course, Europe being top of my list,
sure.
And frankly, other things. Congresswoman Capito is right. We've got to watch FHA. We've got to continue to focus on more aggressive ways to address the fact that too many Americans are not spending right now because they know that they're underwater on their homes. There's a limited amount, certainly under the current political circumstances, we can do to do that, but that should be job one.
There is a huge debate right now about what the #1 priority should be. There was a new poll that was out today from Hamilton Place Strategies that says raising taxes is the #1 priority for Democrats, that they polled on this, that takes precedence over an increase in stimulus spending, over protecting the environment, or even over regulating Wall Street. Is that a message that you all have heard back from your constituents? And Congressman Himes and Waters, I'd ask you that first.
Well, let me just say that the #1 issue for Democrats is jobs, jobs, jobs. We're talking about job creation with our infrastructure. We're talking about capital formation for small businesses so that they can invest in their communities and create jobs. So when you say that increasing taxes is our #1 priority, I think it would be...
Let me rephrase that. Increasing taxes on the wealthy, that was the #1 priority. Well, they would like to see more fairness that comes out. These are Democrats who were polled and asked this question.
We're talking about income equality. We're talking about there is a big gap between those at the top, where you have CEOs who have huge salaries and bonuses, and people who are working in these companies who are barely making it. This is about what's happening with the middle class. The middle class is not able to enjoy the quality of life that they expected, given their ability to earn money. And so it's about jobs, it's about fairness, and it's about income equality. And I believe that when you talk about income equality and you talk who's paying what, then you have to look at this big gap between the haves and the have-nots.
If I could add there, we're not usually as Democrats necessarily accused of having a fiscal adjustment at the top of our list. Now, for some of us, it is. It's unfair to say that it's not about jobs. Our top 3, 4, 5, 6 priorities are jobs. But
these are Democratic voters.
Our point is very simple, which is that we have a huge national fiscal adjustment to do. And there are going to be some very, very tough cuts as part of that fiscal adjustment. And if you expect Democrats to vote for those cuts, and some of us will, you cannot tell us that the very wealthiest people in this country get a pass on this project. And by the way, I represent an awful lot of very wealthy people, many of whom say, in Connecticut's 4th District, many of whom say, I'm willing to pay my share here. I want it done efficiently and I want it done well, but I'm willing to pay my share. That's our only point.
Most of them that we hear back from say, as long as that goes hand in glove with cuts that come along with it.
And hand in glove with deficit reduction, and hand in glove in investment in the things that will make this country and them prosperous in the future. Education, our roadways, our railways. That's not a hard thing to say, frankly, even amongst people who are going to pay more under some kind of adjustment plan.
We're going to have a response to that from the other side of the aisle in just a moment.
We'll have more from, more from our special panel. We're going to take a quick break here. As I say, in the next hour, we're going to have a preview of tonight's State of the Union address with that lady right there, Valerie Jarrett, White House advisor, plus Senator Bob Corker on the Banking Committee will join us. And then the chairman and CEO of Honeywell, David Cody, on what business wants to hear from the president tonight. Squawk Box, live from our nation's capital. We'll be right back. Squawk is in session this morning on Capitol Hill. We are speaking to members of the Financial Services Committee ahead of tonight's big speech from President Obama. Chairman Spencer Backus, Republican Congresswoman Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia, which handed it to the Bearcats. Yeah, you're lucky, that three-point shot. Did you see that? Yeah, that's all right. Congressman Maxine Waters, Democrat from California, and Congressman Jim Himes, Democrat from Connecticut. And we promised before we went to break that we'd hear from the other side. I would say you agree that jobs are the priority, but the question that Becky posited about whether taxing higher taxes, especially for the rich among constituents, is a high priority, I imagine you want to get to jobs in a different way. It's amazing that we all want jobs, but we can't agree on how to get them, right?
Well, that's right. In fact, President Obama cast himself as defender of the middle class, and that the problem is that the wealthy don't pay enough. But look at his policies and what they've done to the middle class. The Obama administration has been a disaster for the middle class. Now, those are harsh words, but gas prices have doubled. I have counties that I represent, over 50% of the population has to travel 40 or 50 miles for a job. Their gas prices have doubled. 2 million of them are out of work. Now, he says that things were bad, and we always hear things were bad when the president took over. They were, but he's made them worse. His policies have made them worse. And we're not addressing those problems. You're not going to address those problems by raising taxes and hiring more government workers. You're not going to hire them by this crony capitalism. It's not capitalism. What he does is crony capitalism, like Solyndra, where he puts $500 million in a failed company. That's not capitalism. That's not how to create jobs. You have a pipeline that he's blocked, bringing 1 million barrels of oil from Canada, our friend, that would create 20,000 jobs just building the pipeline, but would lower our energy costs because he's playing to his to his base. That oil, that 1 million barrels of oil a day, is going to go to China. It's going to create jobs in China. That's not what we ought to be doing. Now, I will say this. The House has passed 24 job-creating bills to raise capital, and it takes capital to create jobs. They're over in the Senate. The Senate is a do-nothing Senate. The president says do-nothing Congress. It's the Senate that won't act. Now, tonight, he's probably going to advocate for some of the same measures that Jim Himes passed, H.R. 1965, right, which would allow the banks to loan more to small businesses. But he needs to talk to the Senate. He needs to point to the senators and tell them to start on the job.
Congressman Himes, there's your bill, and there's some other ones that they're not all from your side of the aisle, but they're all about capital formation, Entrepreneur Access Act. Do you agree that the president tonight should say get on the stick, Harry Reid, and pass some of these things, or should it be focused on his own initiative?
Well, the good news is that there has, as the chairman points out, been some bipartisanship, and it's not often on the front page of the news, but yes, the bill that he referred to that I worked with a Republican colleague to make it easier for banks to raise money is a good example. Frankly, so are the trade agreements. We had 3 trade agreements passed which drew Republican and Democratic support. But look, at the end of the day, there are different visions. Many of the bills that the chairman refers to that are over there in the Senate are designed to reduce the amount of rules and regulations that keep our air and our water clean. Now, there's no economist out there saying that this economy is going to rock and roll when we start polluting our air and our water more. And so if you expect the Democrats to cotton on to that kind of thinking, it's not going to happen. But the good news is there is room for this discussion. You know, infrastructure, highways, railways, I don't care what party you're part of, you know that if we let those things crumble, we're not going to be prosperous in the future. We may get there on that, and maybe show another bipartisan achievement before November.
Before the election, I mean, that's my big question. Is there a sense here in Washington, because we hear it from outside the Beltway, that there's no way anything's going to get done between now and November, that it's too difficult? Is there a real sense among the people that you talk to, your colleagues, that there will be some bipartisan support for some of these things before November?
Let me just say that nobody has provided leadership on bipartisanship more than this president. This president has reached out. He has invited Republicans up to the White House. He has tried everything to create a relationship. But unfortunately, too many came into Congress, many described as Tea Party, with the idea that their only agenda is to get rid of President Obama and not to agree to any tax equality. And so it's very difficult. I think that rather than talking about the president should be talking to Reid, I think that the Republicans and the Republican leadership should be talking about what's most important for this country. Is it more important to continue these attacks on the president, trying to bring him down, or do you have the best interests of this country at heart? Are you willing to do job creation? Are you really willing to talk about investment in our businesses so that they can prosper and they can hire people? President has a great jobs bill. The president has talked about how important it is to improve this infrastructure. We have bridges that are collapsing, sewers that need to be redone, streets and roads, all of that. And that's part of improving the business environment. And so this president has been the leader on trying to work with the Republicans in order to do what's best for this country.
Congresswoman Capito, let's give you the last word on this.
Well, thank you. I do serve on Transportation Committee along with Financial Services. We're going to be marking up the major transportation bill, 5-year bill, infrastructure. We're all talking about how it's a job creator. I think you'll see us come together in a bipartisan way. Will it all pass together? Probably not, but I think that the essence of the bill is there. I think it's something that we want across the aisle. If I could just respond to something Congressman Himes said about an energy economy. I represent West Virginia, an energy state. We have vast natural resources, coal and natural gas. The regulatory environment that exists under this administration is choking our jobs to a standstill. And it quite frankly, not only does it endanger job creation, it also is our energy independence and energy security. Do we want to pollute our air and water? Absolutely not. I live there. We live there. But this administration has just been set on an agenda that I think works in contra to job creation. Keystone's a good example.
We'd like to thank you all for your time today. We really appreciate it. And Chairman Backus, thank you very much for allowing us to use this hearing room today. We appreciate your time for the last hour.